My name is Akwasi Owusu-Bempah. I'm a senior fellow here at Massey College and chair of the governing board. It is absolutely my pleasure to be introducing our event today. Deepa Metha, of course, needs no introduction, but we'll get one anyway. Oscar-nominated filmmaker whose work is internationally renowned. Her emotionally resonated, award-winning films have played in every major film festival and been sold and distributed around the globe. As a criminologist, I have quite the affection for Biba boys. I've been encouraged, and I won't say by who, to say that a Biba Boys 2.0 would be a wonderful contribution to our media landscape, and so I will just put that out into the air right now. Thank you. She's joined, of course, by editor-in-chief of Newest Magazine and Massey Senior Fellow, Raji Aujla, pardon me.
That was so bad.
I know.
Do you want?
Yes?
Raji Aujla.
Aujla. As I said, Akwasi Owusu-Bempah, and we've made a joke about the phonetical spelling of my name, and I have part of this crossed out. My apologies, but welcome. I'd also like to acknowledge the land that Massey College sits on. Massey College is built on land where many indigenous peoples have lived. It is on treaty lands and the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and the Haudenosaunee peoples, pardon me. We want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward the land and the great privilege that we have to work on this land today. Raji, over to you. My apologies.
Thank you so much. No, not at all. I actually had written out my name in the worst way possible. I wrote aubergine, crossed out the B-E-R, and put la, thinking that he would understand that it would be Aujla. But it's so wonderful to have you all here to celebrate such an important, iconic person of Canada. And it's my pleasure to be a part of this in a very small way. Deepa, thank you.
Oh, thank
First
you.
and foremost for everything.
Thank you.
I feel like we have the relationship where we could just go right into it.
Go for it.
Okay. So Deepa published an article in Variety that I'm going to be referencing because basically I feel like that's made our conversation today quite redundant. So much that you touched on. But chiefly, I think as a second generation Canadian, it's remarkable how many similarities are still felt between your experience then and I think what a lot of kind of second generation hyphen identities are feeling now. So, I feel, I guess, that you're othered in Canada, but you can also feel like you're being othered in India. Mm-hmm. Where's home for you right now?
Airplane. I mean, really. I'm not kidding. I mean, I don't know. I felt for so long, as we've spoken about, I felt India was home. And then I started feeling unsafe in India when our film Water was shut down and it was horrific. And then I remember sitting on an Air Canada flight and coming back to Toronto and putting the seatbelt on and really very, very dramatically, melodramatically bursting into tears because I suddenly realized that Canada was home because safety was where home was. And then last year, Funny Boy went through the roof and created such an ire with a certain group of Tamil diaspora that I opened our condo door and there were two huge guys, like 6'4" each, standing on either side, and I said, "Hi," and they said, "We are your bodyguards." And then I said, "What's happening? I mean, this doesn't happen in Canada," but we were told that to expect, bodily harm. So I was walking around with bodyguards, and then Canada stopped being home. Because if home is where safety is, we're not safe anywhere, and that's maybe okay,
Yeah.
And it's perhaps, to give so much of yourself to one country is, in this climate and where we are, is perhaps not so wise.
Beautifully put. You spoke about, I remember in the article, that there were two life experiences where you felt seen. I wondered if you can expand on that. I'd be so curious.
Well, when they asked me to write this article for Variety, which was about a week ago, and I mentioned you, Atom, in it, and I said one of the very important things, filmmakers who really helped me feel at home, was you. You know, you were just so marvelous with Sam and me, and how you helped navigate Sam and me to where it went. But one of the things they said to me, the editor said that, please describe when you felt seen. And I thought to myself, what does it mean to be seen? I mean, seen by whom? Do I have to be validated by somebody who's not brown to be seen? What does it mean? Mm-hmm. And I thought about the first time I came to Canada, and we went to I think it was like with my ex-husband to the backyard of a very affluent family's home, and next door to them was like a 10-year-old kid who kept on shouting, and this is years ago, I smell parking shit, I smell parking shit, and I sort of was looking around, not realizing that he was talking about me. Then he said, no, it's you, and I thought, you know, idiot, just dismissed him. But when I thought about it later, I felt that was the first time that somebody had said, and I'd been in Canada for 2 weeks, had said something to me which came straight from the mouth of a child. I mean, where had he heard it? In school or at the family table? Or where did that come from? I'm talking about 40 years ago. And things haven't changed.
Yeah, it's sad to see that things haven't changed and progressed, even though, you know, with social media and our access to being more progressive, our access to world knowledge in general, it's never been so abundant and free. Mm-hmm. And now we're seeing this almost polarizing world that we're existing in, trying to locate ourselves within. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think that speaks to a little bit about kind of the two, and it's not that we're made up of our two binary, you know, definitions of who we are, either Indian or Canadian.
I know,
so I'm not going to try to put us into that, but we do have to straddle it based on what other people and how they perceive us. And so under that perspective, you know, your films, I mean, you spoke about water, there's like effigies of you being burnt in India. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, you're being acknowledged as this like immigrant success story and this remarkable filmmaker in Canada. And I guess I just wonder, like, how do you straddle these very polarizing ways of people looking at you?
I don't know. Maybe I'm a sucker for punishment. I don't know why. You know, it's difficult, Raji, at the moment. When I think about what happened with water, it was so sudden, and David and myself, and I remember my daughter Devyani was there, and she was like, you know, this was her first thing of being on set, and she was working as a stills photographer, that she just didn't. She was really horrified by the thought of her mother's effigies being burnt, and we weren't expecting it. It just happened overnight, and I was surrounded by women, and that's what intrigued me, who had you know, thalis, which were sort of like platters, steel platters, and rolling pins, and said, "We're going to kill you because what you've done, or what you're proposing to do, because the film hadn't been made." Is anti-Hindu. The film is about widows. I mean, it's based on real things that happened, the marginalization of women, and women who have been who've lost their husbands, and then they're worth nothing. I mean, it didn't come from anywhere. It came from seeing what was happening in Varanasi, because most of the homes for widows are all over India, but a lot of them are located in Varanasi. And India is, I mean, I grew up there, I was born there, my family is still there. It's, to this day, it's completely precious to me, but an aspect of it is gone forever. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if I navigate these two worlds well. I just, it's difficult, but yet in a way, like I said, in a strange way, it's liberating, because you care so much for a place, and you put so much of your effort and your life into it. And maybe one should spend that time focusing on oneself.
Yeah. We just released an issue for the magazine called Internal Traveler. And so much of it is that when you look outside and you see this scary and dark world, and truly it is, you can't remove yourself from it. I feel like any of us reading what's happening in Ukraine or in even in India and the rise of nationalism, down south where female bodies are suddenly men are making decisions about our bodies. It's hard to not be affected by that, but then looking inward and trying to locate peace and shanti inside is something that I've been thinking about during COVID.
No, it's a good thing to think about, because there's this sort of search for validation, search for safety, search for some kind of peace is not, especially after the pandemic and, like you said, what's happening all over the world right now, rise of populism in all forms. Maybe we should be looking inside. And I'm not being religious, because I'm sort of an avowed agnostic, if anything. But this is really important. Validation from outside is not going to happen, whether it's from a country or from a people. Or if it happens, it's very fleeting.
Yeah. I feel like when we look for validation, then we put too much power in the people from whom we're wanting validation.
Absolutely.
And so suddenly the power imbalance is like thrown off.
Oh God, I really wanted to be I wanted that validation from India. I really did. Yeah. And I certainly did when I embraced Canada, want that validation. And somehow with Funny Boy, I started rethinking it. And now I can very safely say that if India gives me her stories, Canada gives me the freedom to express them.
To tell them.
Yeah, and that's, and I thank Canada for that. And I thank India for her stories. But, that's where it begins and ends, I guess.
That's beautiful. I mean, what a statement to make. Never thought about it like that before. It's similar to you. I felt like I was seeking validation from, it was largely, I think, being brought up in a conservative Punjabi household. It was under the kind of tightrope of patriarchal upbringing, and then the egalitarian and kind of agnostic teachings of the Sikh faith.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do you navigate both of those? And so much of my validation was not so much of needing somebody to affirm my existence, as much as it was that having been othered so much and displaced by the othering, to find a place of belonging. And the validation was more to place make for belonging. Yeah. And hence the traveling internally, being like, well, do you feel belonging in your own body? If no, then that's where we should start.
We should start with that. Yeah.
There's something that you wrote about. It's a question, and I've thought about this question a lot, so I'm going to ask it to you.
I'm not getting worried. What is it?
And it probably will be like, Raji, you should know this answer. But you posed this great question, which is our work and its merit truly recognized, or are we a mere box that someone in power ticks off? And I thought about that for so long, because I work in a space where EDI is something that everybody's talking about, representation. And when we chatted earlier, you said one of the great enemies of representation is tokenism. And putting these two things together, I guess my question is, what does it mean to be inclusive to you? Like, how do you look at that, this world that everybody's grappling with?
Well, there are two things. I mean, one is definitely, I feel, whatever the reason is, whether it's a box that's being ticked off, or whether it's people who really do want to, people in power, people do want to give an opportunity to people who are not white, and they sincerely do, then that's good. Yeah. And I say, why not? It's about time. I'm sort of all for it. But I remember about 15 years ago, we decided that if all things are equal, then I would rather have a woman at that point be the DP or any other person who can be in the film. But that's about merit. But if there's a man and a woman, I would rather choose a woman. I think that it's very nice and it's generous, etc. And I think, Seema, you and myself were talking about it one day, that just to give things because of you want to colored people is, you have to make sure that you don't set them up for failure, because you have to build a scaffolding. It just can't be, okay, now I have you, Raji, who's going to be, the head of my film company or whatever. You're bound for failure. So sometimes I question, are we being positioned for failure? I mean, these are thoughts that come to mind, and I'm not saying that's true, but I think to be aware of that is very important. And how do you deal with it when that happens? I mean,
Absolutely.
you get a position and you say, okay, I'm going to take it and run.
Yeah.
But if you fail in 2 months' time, then somebody says, okay, we did it and it's over.
We tried. And what that leads to is epic burnouts.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
I remember one of the positions that I held was it was to be a creative director, and it had nothing to do with the color of my skin or anything like that. And then when I started going through this position and the daily experience, and started to now have to educate Western thought on what it means to be not racist, what it means to not ask a person like me what my caste is in front of a board of directors. And yes, it actually happened.
You're serious, really?
Absolutely happened.
Wow.
So what does it mean then when my job was to be a creative director, but now I'm educating too? I didn't sign up for that. And then they asked me to represent South Asians at this one junction, and then you know what do you think about truth and reconciliation? Oh, now I have to speak on behalf. and you just throw that all onto that one person of color that you've invited in. And that's where, and actually Devyani and I speak quite a bit about the epic burnouts, because you're no longer being asked to do the job that you were hired for, that you have your skill set in. You're asked to do all of the other things, and then in addition to that, to the tasks at hand. And I don't know how to coexist in that responsibility. It's impossible, because you're set up to fail.
You're set up to fail.
Yeah.
You'll be, the boxes, it might be ticked off, but that's not what you signed up for.
And yet we say yes.
Because we're desperate. No, because we're desperate.
And I think a lot of that,
not,
you said something on our call, and it really kind of made me feel sad, because we see now progress, and we're starting to see some things change. But you said that for a while, films that were Canadian were only English or French speaking. And meanwhile, you're trying to make films that are stories that India has given you. And of course, those are not going to be in English and French all the time. And you've been fighting to be inclusive and representative in this landscape. And people are only starting to change that now. So for 15 plus years, you've been fighting a fight that nobody even knows is a fight.
No, my God, it was quite a fight, Raji. I mean, we spent about 15 years talking to Telefilm Canada, to the Minister of Heritage, two of them, Melanie Joly, and then who is the other one, David? Who's now again the minister?
Pablo.
Yeah, Pablo. And saying, can you please help us?
Yeah.
Because if I'm a Canadian citizen and I'm a director, and I've written my film and I want to make it in Hindi for it to be authentic. I mean, this is before the word authentic became, popular. That's
the buzzword.
Yeah, exactly, the buzzword. Was that, why can't we do it? And then about a year ago, I was just delighted that when we found out that Telefilm Canada has changed its policy and has said that, yes, you can make a film in the language that you want to make it in, whether it's Somali or whatever it is. But for us to make sure that it's authentic, there will be a person on set who will be the authenticator police to make sure that the language is right. I mean, I'm saying this is crazy, because if you want to make a film in Hindi, if spoken Hindi in different parts of India is very different. what are you going to do?
You know, I was going to pause you and be like, a round of applause for this change. And then when you followed it with that, I'm like, oh God, there's so much work to do. And here we continue going.
But we did.
Right.
So, you know, now we can make our films in whichever language we want to if we're Canadian citizens.
So then.
So yes, let's start for that. Yes, that's great. You know, but these are things that, you know, filmmakers like Atom, I mean, have been fighting for years and wanting it, and it's important that. But now we're going to have a police person, so it's like it's a bit like the Cultural Revolution. I feel what's happening now.
Yeah,
you know.
And I think, you know, I think we've also, you know, thinking about the kind of, especially out in the West, and its need for kind of hegemonic cultures, and you know, there's always this kind of like default to be kind of mass culture, and everything falls under this kind of, you know, umbrella of what it means to be American, or an umbrella of what it means to be kind of multicultural and Canadian and friendly and saying a boot and whatever else. But the work that you do, it's so much in the nuance, and you know, you're not trying to, I think you're trying to break stereotypes. Is that a fair thing to say?
I'm not aware of it. I mean, I'm not saying, okay, this is, I mean, I remember when we did Fire, I really wanted to do it because I'd read a short story called Le Havre, which was written in 1942 by a wonderful Urdu writer, and it was about a lesbian relationship, and was written in India, and patriarchy, and it had stayed with me for years. So, and I thought about my own family, and you know, we came from a joint family. This is a couple of families living together, and my mother and her sister-in-laws, the two of them, and this was in a place in Amritsar. So, and they were really very close emotionally. I don't know, I don't think they had a lesbian relationship. And I think if I asked my mother, she'll say, what's that? You know, she'll have no clue. But it was like, how can you bridge something that's an emotional bonding between women, and yet it can become a physical one. So it was curiosity that made me want to write Fire, and I was lucky because there was no funding at all from anybody in Canada for it, and if it wasn't for David and Suresh, you know, who felt sorry for me and said, okay, do it, and you know, it would have never been made. But it was curiosity, definitely. Yeah.
And you think about something like the trilogy and the impact it's had on, and it continues to have on people both in India and outside, especially in India, as these kind of cultural revolutions are happening, and a lot more Indian cinema has started to change a little bit, not a lot, but you know, still you see things like 4 shots only or something. There's, you know, a few of these things coming out that seem to mark India as being a bit more progressive and you know, in its representation of what it means to be Indian. You've been doing that for a long time, and I think a lot of people appreciate it because they are able to, again, locate themselves within the stories that you've told or are continuing to tell. I have a question about this kind of feeling disenfranchised, of course. We've kind of spoken about that, but you know, I guess you said something about how, because of the pandemic, the pandemic could have made the disenfranchised even more disenfranchised, or there's effect of COVID to people and their work. What are you noticing that the pandemic has done to your art making?
Well, it's I thought that perhaps because we were all at home mostly and working from home, we would have more time, falsely obviously, to be more contemplative, and that when we did emerge from this sort of space that we found, this dark space that we found ourselves in, that we'd be more open, more caring. I mean, I was like an idiot. I really felt that, and it was a bit of a shock that the pandemic was sort of over, and we become. I question our humanity. Somewhere it just feels to have faded, and it hurts. You know, what's happening with the abortion, what's happening with Ukraine, what's happening in India, what happened in Ottawa with the convoy. I mean, it was like, really? I mean, firstly, it was quite funny, I thought, that the world would get so upset about a convoy when we come from a place where, you know, the world's falling apart. But the fact that it happened in Canada.
The fact that it happened in Canada, and also the fact that people were surprised it happened in Canada.
I know, exactly. It's like, you know, what do you mean? Finally, of course, we're human beings, Canadians, you know, excuse me.
Yeah.
And then there was this thing that, and it's so dangerous that Pierre Trudeau and his family were taken away and hidden. And I thought, my God, from truckers, and you know, there's Zelensky. So it's like, I don't know if it's true or not, poor Trudeau. I mean, he gets such a lot of crap all the time. But so it didn't happen. Yeah. What I thought that we would be more in touch with our humanity, in fact, it's been the opposite. It's been a bit disappointing.
Yeah, I think I just got hit with that moment right now of realization that you just spoke of. Because, you know, you read something like Arundhati Roy's article for the Financial Times at the beginning of the beginning of the pandemic, and it said something along the lines of, I hope she never watches this because she writes so much better than what I'm about to say. But she said, the world has never been leveled before. It's never been brought to its knees and leveled before like this. And similar to you, I was like, this is such a great moment to look inward, to really think about what, you know, what our priorities are. And then to see such a polarized world be so visible, it's both parts scary, but also good, because at least we can now see the realities and the truths that I think has always existed, that, you know, there's this, that perhaps we didn't realize we're so dominant in people's subconscious or conscious as before.
Yeah. You know, there's a wonderful line in Massey Sidhwa, who's a wonderful writer, and whose books, The Ice Candy Man, became Earth. And one of the lines that she wrote, there were two lines that really attracted me to the novel and to make it into Earth. One was that all wars are fought on women's bodies. And I thought, And the other was where Ice Candy Man, who is Muslim and who's seeing the partition of India into Pakistan and India and is falling apart, says to the woman that he really loves, who happens to be a Hindu, says that, stay with me, because we all have a janvar, which is an animal within us. All human beings do. But if there is a force that keeps it in check, the force of love, perhaps the animal will always be caged. And somehow the pandemic and Trump, I think, has opened the Pandora's box.
Yeah. Where do you see it going? Or where do you hope to see it go?
I have no, you know, every day brings something that's, I don't want this to be a downer, but you know, every day something happens that isn't, that's a bit dodgy. And then something happens, like how good Tom Cruise is in Top Gun. I mean, that makes me smile. And so that's great, you know. And so it's like you're living with dual reality.
Yeah.
And but maybe maybe I don't know. I just feel that there has to be something good that happens. And being an Indian and being a Hindu of sorts, I don't know. I do believe perhaps that this is Kali Yuga, which means an era of darkness that is inevitable. But we need a Kali Yuga to be for the Raj Yuga, which is the next stage of awakening to happen.
Yeah, you can only see the stars at night.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's a good way to put it. Remember that.
I was curious about, you know, since we're talking about identity, we're talking about this kind of polarized, thankfully, I guess, in some levels, honest world that's being reflected back to us. How do you make art in such a polarized world?
I don't know. I think that perhaps, I think that Toni Morrison probably said it best when she said all art is political. So what you make is, what I make is, I feel political. I don't even think of it as art. I think it just becomes what I know best to do. But I feel what I do is perhaps political.
And then you also, I think, at one point we're speaking about authenticity and representation and everything else that, of course, we're tasked with. And I guess when you are having to make art in such a, it's such a responsibility, the work that you do, and then you're, I guess, do you think about audiences when you are making your art? Do you think about who's going to see this, and does that have any?
I wish I did, because then maybe I'd become rich or something, you know. I don't. And I don't know, I'm not saying that because I think it's a cool thing to say, but I feel that when I write a script or I'm given a script to do, I don't think that it's going to be popular, or because then you start revising it. I mean, I'd rather the failures be my own. But it's always about curiosity, and that never stops, even when you've made the film. Even if you've written it, you've directed it, and it's out in the world. You know, I still think about, I wonder it could have been different, not because it's not popular or didn't get the 5-star review or anything, but because that curiosity is never assuaged in any way. So, you know, I think I was telling you about this. I just did a half-hour episode for an anthology series set in LA, and it was about, and the reason I did it was because it opened windows that I didn't know, which is it was about a young Korean boy in Detroit who went on to make the most amazing hats in the world, and Aretha Franklin wore his hats to Obama's inauguration, and he was brilliant. But he came from Seoul at the age of 8, and his relationship was, the person who was his mentor was a black woman from Detroit called Martha Jean King. And the whole script was so superb because it was such an unlikely relationship. Detroit, 1985, an 8-year-old boy from Korea, and Martha Jean King, was 50 years old and a radio personality, and she became his mentor. And I thought, how wonderful. And I learned so much. I don't know if that's politically correct or not, because I'm neither Korean nor black. So can I make a film like that? I did. Well, we'll see what happens. But that's what I mean, that, you know, and I think I did tell you, Raji, that what stays in my mind is a quote from Brecht, where he says, art is not what mirrors reality, but it's a hammer that shapes it. I want to be that hammer, you know.
You are that hammer.
I mean, I'm trying to.
You're the full two of us.
I don't want to be restricted by, you can't do this because I'm not a guy, or I'm not Korean and I'm not black. I mean, how sad would that be, you know?
I agree. I think I was speaking to a friend of mine, and she's so lovely, from the UK. And she was saying, I don't identify as a woman, a male, I don't identify as anything. My bio just says I'm Sikh, and being Sikh means you're a student. And I was like, I love that. And how does that resonate with people? And she's like, well, I have to kind of contextualize all of this and this. And I was like, to be living in a world where we don't have to see all of the markers that people put on us, whether it's you're brown or you're a woman or you're a millennial or whatever the case might be, to exist in a world where none of that should matter, and it's really about the curious brain and the desire for public good, the desire to move the dial or change something that perhaps needs to be changed, or question that even. We're not there yet, but I feel like we're slowly chipping away.
Yeah, and we'll get
slowly.
there. I mean, you know, there's one thing that I'm sure about, is convinced about, is human resilience. And, you know, if there are people who protest, you know, who will say at some point, you know, And I, see, we were talking about it the other day, and she said, there's some reality to, some truth to the fact that hurt people hurt. And once we sort of are now the flavor of the month and get into power, I want to make sure that we don't do to young white filmmakers what was done to us.
To us.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's about not wanting to duplicate the oppressive systems that repressed us, and then how do you reimagine that? And it takes, to me, because I am confronted with this every single day at least once, this desire to not replicate those models, but the question of now only selecting a black writer to write about black art, or whatever the case might be, being like, well, we're not going to do the same thing that was done to us. That, to me, takes love and compassion and understanding, because so much
I know
is being put on our bodies that we're not asking for, but being in decision making, in positions of where you have to make decisions. I think that's something that we have to remind ourselves quite a bit.
I think it's a good thing to remind ourselves, because we do have, the window has been opened, but we don't control it.
No.
So we don't know when it's going to be shut. So go through it, but be aware.
Go through it with a hammer.
Go through it with a hammer.
Open up the window.
Yes.
You're a very curious person. I'm going to ask you this one question before I open it up to our lovely audience. What are you curious about now?
We had this great, it's very interesting. For 5 days, Devyani was curating, was one of the curators of Penn, amazing, yes, of Penn World Vision in New York, and it is, and we went there and we went through, most of the panels were the ones that she'd put together, and they were, and some that weren't, and there was one about nation state, which Rana Dasgupta was the main speaker on, and Branko Milovic, and it was really depressing, because where are we going? I mean, that was the conversation, and what is the nation state, and who are we as different countries, and but it was food for thought. So at least what happened with that panel was that we started a dialogue, or it started a dialogue within a group of people who didn't know each other, and it was fascinating, and it still stays with me, and I'm so grateful that maybe the pandemic ending will give us opportunities like this, that we can actually see people talk, and it isn't Zoom doom, it's like really there. Yeah. And you can see their gestures, and you can see their passion or their boredom, but you can see it. So then I feel hopeful.
So, and sorry, I actually did have one more question. I promise I'll hand this over to the floor soon, but something that Massey College, it's our motto, which is Sapere Aude. I'm looking at the board chair to see if I pronounce that correctly. But that means dare to know, dare to be wise. I guess I have a question, whether you have any words of wisdom or anything you'd want to say to I think we have our filmmaker in residence here, and our young junior fellows.
Oh. I don't know, be the hammer. Yeah. Be the hammer. Don't buy into constrictions or what's expected of you. Yeah.
I'm going to follow up with that.
Okay.
I hate
I knew
myself.
you would.
I'm sorry.
I knew you would.
So also, I tend to be very curious myself, which is probably why I'm in the job that I'm in. Being the hammer is hard, and I think we've all acknowledged that, especially women of color, like my peers, Devyani and Seema and I, actually, we've all spoken about this. Being the hammer requires responsibility, but compassion and care. So some words of advice on how to balance being a hammer and making sure that we're also taking care of ourselves.
I think if you are the hammer, you control it. And that means when you, I think that would come with certain amount of responsibility, because it takes, it's not easy to be the hammer. It's easy to say it.
Yeah.
But if you're going to pick it up and actually going to have an aspect of reality or make it up, then you must be responsible. But what does responsibility mean? Does it mean that I'm thinking of 20 people so I become politically correct? No. It's about responsibility not to harm.
Yeah. Responsibility, how to strike the hammer.
Yeah, how to strike it,
Yeah.
And what's the motive?
Yeah.
Why do you want to strike the hammer?
There's like a list of all the reasons why I want to, have the hammer. And
I think that, I just didn't learn it or read about it one day. It's you can't strike the hammer alone. That's the other thing. I think of what the whole process of my life at this point, and I think of people who've made it possible that I could pick up the hammer. I think of David. I think of Devyani. I think of Hussein Amarshi, who believed in what I wanted to say. And I think of Ellis, who said, I'll show your film. I mean, and it was really brave of him at that point. And I think of Gurbani, I think of you. You're all young, intelligent, and your curiosity is what makes me feel so hopeful. And it's not because all of you are brown, it's because you're good people.
We love you. I mean, I think I can say that on behalf of all of the women of color, but also just the amount of impact that your work has had, and it takes a community, and I think it's important to remember that. The hammer is but one tool, but it exists within a toolbox, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves that we do require that sense of community to continue on what we're doing. I'd like to open the floor to questions, because I feel like I've monopolized all this time. Alyssa, I think we have a mic, and then we have our first question right there. Thank you, Deepa.
Hi, Deepa. Can everyone hear me?
No, I can't.
The mic is just for the recording. So just speak a little higher.
Okay. Hi, Deepa. My name is Apala. I am a resident junior fellow here, and I'm a PhD candidate in English. I just want to let you know that it's wonderful to have you here. Also, having been educated in India and been to university in India, a student of humanities in the 2010s, and I'm sure you don't need to be told this again, but I just want to reiterate how significant your work has been for our generation. Growing up in India and studying the humanities in India, because it just opened up very different ways of thinking and very different ways of understanding that world. And probably then my question actually is based on that kind of an understanding, because I think I see your work and the works of other scholars. Like I was thinking of Ruth Vanita, I was thinking of your work as, kind of not entirely, obviously, entirely Indian, because it's international, and at the same time, it's not entirely very diasporic, as we understand that, as kind of this abstract, rarefied category. I see your work as kind of located somewhere in between, with a very deeply rooted, almost internationalist consciousness, artistic consciousness, deeply rooted in India. And I don't know if it's because you were raised there and so on, but and I see myself as kind of occupying, being an international student, first generation immigrant, I see myself as occupying that kind of in-betweenness where I'm not a diasporic consciousness yet, and I'm so deeply critical, I find myself being deeply critical of several diasporic aspects or aspects of the diaspora. And at the same time, I feel myself more and more alienated from India, as you were just articulating. So I want to ask you about what about that, what about your formative years in India really shaped your work? And also, if are we losing that kind of consciousness that I'm talking about in India today? And if not, then what are the kind of aspects, like in your work, you focused on interreligious conflict, you focused on same-sex relationship, you focused on feminism, and so today, from 2005, we've come so many years, we've come almost 2 decades. Today's India, if you had to focus through that kind of an internationalist lens, which is also deeply rooted in India, what are the themes today that you would want to focus on, or you think that we as scholars of India could focus on? Sorry, very long-winded question,
Okay,
but I
I
hope I made some sense.
Yes, you did. You did. I'll focus on the things that stay with me. One is I was born in India. I went to school there. I went to university there. I mean, many years in Lady Shri Ram College, and then I got my first job in India at the Statesman, which was a newspaper, and then I worked as a receptionist for a friend at a place called the Cinema Workshop in Delhi. They made documentary filmmakers, and they made documentary films. And after 3 days, I was fired because they said I had a terrible way of communicating on the phone. So that was that. But they were nice enough to say, "But we'll teach you how to if you're interested." I was waiting to see if I would go and study further. Said, "Till you decide what you want to do, we'll teach you how to edit, and we'll teach you how to do sound, and we'll teach you little things." And so I said, "Sure." And that's how I actually learned how to make films of sorts. I'd grown up in Amritsar. My father was a film distributor, so we grew up in movie halls. Literally after school, we'd go there and sit in movies. And I saw my first movie called Mamta, where the main character is called Devyani, and that's what I call my daughter. I saw it 46 times or something. I mean, it was ridiculous. So I grew up with that, seeing movie stars come, and it was a world that I said I absolutely don't want to have anything to do with, because every Friday, my father his mood would depend on what the box office was. So it's like being a doctor's kid. You don't want to be a doctor, but that's what I ended up doing. And India not only just gave me birth, or my family is still there, it has really informed what I love, which is film. So that has stayed with me. Nobody can take that away. The politics can't, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, what's happening, and the rise of populism, not rise, I mean, it's pretty scary right now, it can be used. And many filmmakers that I do know right now in India are doing just that, at the risk of their lives. And Anand Patwardhan is amazing. He keeps on doing it, and whether it's films that don't get seen or aren't popular, they are still getting made here. The film that I really want to make, which informs, and that's your diaspora part of your question, is based on a book by Sudhir Kakkar called Meera and the Mahatma. And it's the relationship between Gandhiji and his first disciple. So who was white. So it sort of inverts everything that we are brought up thinking. It's not Gandhiji who's her disciple, she's his. And it's not about color, it's about the thirst to learn. So that's a script that we've been developing with Suresh's son, amazing young filmmaker, Amit, and that's the one I'd really like to do, because that addresses both my worlds. I hope I answered your question.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
But we have a question right over
Deepa, I
here.
have a question.
Okay.
I speak loud enough.
It's for the camera.
So, Deepa, a lot of your work has, focused on the human aspect of feminism. That's been the thing. And then you alluded to what's going on in India today. Do you see in your lifetime making a film on the current dynamics in India that all of us are so concerned about? Do you see yourself ever focusing on what's happening there?
I would very much like to, Suresh, but the reality is that you can't make a film in India till you give the script to the government of India, to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, and they will look at the script, and they will either say yes, it should be made, or yes, or no, it shouldn't be. And even if you coach your script in many ways which is sort of discreet, they still have somebody from the government who's the local police person, and it's usually a guy who comes there who makes sure that you're shooting exactly the script that you actually had submitted. So it's very difficult. I mean, it's
So as much as you'd like to make it, it's unlikely you'd be allowed to make one?
I think as a film, we did do 3 years ago. We did I think it's actually a terrific series, but it's not seen because it was closed down immediately, for Netflix, based on a book called Leela, and it's amazing because it's supposed to be about Indian dystopia, but it could be about India today. So if anybody wants to see what's happening in India, see Leela, because and they shut it down really fast. And in fact, everybody who had greenlit it in India from Netflix was asked to leave Netflix.
Goodness. Yeah.
So I don't think it's.
By the way, thanks a lot for the pride David and I take in you're alluding to us being involved with your first lesbian film in India.
Well, you guys made it possible. I mean, and I think that the main thing that when the film came out, it was trashed. I mean, movie halls were burnt, and it was like, and the big thing was there are no lesbians in India. So, and then there was a march, and I was invited for it outside a cinema hall in New Delhi called the Regal Cinema Hall. And I went there, and as far as the eye could see, and I'm not kidding, there were placards, and there were a sea of women, Raji, and they were carrying and the placards said, "We are Indians and we are lesbians." And I thought, holy shit, this is great.
That's so wonderful. Yeah. I think we have one more question, and okay, we'll do 2 more questions before we pass it on to Ellis.
Thank you. Well, during the conversation, it was mentioned, or you pointed out or said that you are thinking of the audience very much when you're making your film and you have your ideas and it's your craft. So I wouldn't ask you then. What I might have asked you was, did you have advice for the audiences watching your film, things that they should look for that you would love them not to miss? But instead, then to turn it back, since you're creating, we've got the hammer. Are there parts of, for example, are there parts of, let's say, the film Water, and you had such troubles to get that film done, that you see and that give you particular delight because, yes, that moment you got that was just what you were, as an artist, that's what you were aiming for in that film?
It was, yes, there is. There's, and it just came to me when we were in fact shooting the Korean black film a couple of weeks ago, because the Korean young man who has become this great millionaire is still based in Detroit, and I was talking to him trying to find out more about the character so I could use that, and he said to me in the middle of it all, this was our first conversation, he said, I love water. I mean, I just said, what? Detroit, and he said, there's one scene that stays with me forever. And I said, which one is that? And he said, it's when the young girl gives the laddu, which is a sweet, to an older woman, and she eats it, and she hasn't had one since the time she was married at the age of 8. And I thought, it wasn't my memory as much as it's somebody else's memory that stayed with them. And what is it about that particular scene? And I asked Luke that, and I said, what was it? And he said, it was hope. And so, sometimes you get feedback that reinforces what you've forgotten, but for that moment while you were shooting, it was very important.
There's a lot of blood in that film.
Well, thank you. I mean, poor David had to go through a lot of stuff for that, but it got made. I mean, that's what I mean, that it finally did get made.
Alyssa, we just have Seema in the back.
Hi, Deepa. Thanks for everything. When I think of you, I always think of someone who is a rebel, a truth teller, an activist. These are all good things to me.
And to me.
So I don't know if you identify with those markers, but I'd love to time travel into your past, and I'm curious, when you think about your childhood, is there a particular moment in time or someone in your family or an elder or someone that influenced you who showed you about this world of not being bound by constraints? Where did that come from?
It's strange, Seema, that you asked me that, because I thought about that earlier today, and I think it's my mom. And the moment that came to me today is that I was thinking about what's the next film that I really want to do, and I had this image of my mother telling me a story when I was a kid, and I was asking her what, she was talking about the partition and how Dad had to leave Lahore to come to Amritsar, and how much he missed all his friends in Lahore, and my mother, who was from Delhi, and what the freedom movement meant to them. It was about freedom, and as she was in university, and they felt very strongly about burning everything that was British. So they burned their saris and chiffons and everything else. And her brother, my Mamaji, was really a radical. So he was intent on just getting rid of everything in the house that had anything to do, which showed that they were colonized. And I said, what did you do, Mom? And she said, I just hung on to my book. And I said, what book was it? And she said, I said, not my Dickens. And I thought, wow. That was so wonderful. This 18-year-old hanging on to her book saying, don't burn my Dickens. And I said, what was it called? And she said, what else except Great Expectations? So my mother, definitely.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Deepa.
Oh,
and
my
thank
pleasure.
you, Seema, for such a great question. I'm going to conclude my part of this by something you said that resonated, which is the world awaits us and our stories. And I love that you wrote that in that article. Thank you all, and I'm looking at the camera to you all that are watching. And thank you for just sharing in this moment and bringing those stories to us, because that is the hammer that I think we all need for the work we're doing in our respective industries and fields to move this forward.